Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over my review of the combat beta. If you didn't catch the stream, I did live stream the combat beta and me testing it out a few days ago. If you are interested in seeing some more live streams, I am live streaming a few times a week, so make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you know when I go live. Now, before I go into my experience with the combat beta, for any of you that don't know the changes that are being made in this beta, let's go over them first. The first major change is going from a roll to hit system to a damage potential system. So what exactly does this mean? Well, I'll show you. So this is on the live game. I'm using a tier 50 bow with tier 50 arrows on the Abyssal Beast, and I only have a 31% hit chance. You can see that I am actually rarely hitting the Abyssal Beast. I'll only hit him 31% of the time. The other 69% of the time, I will splash. Comparing this to the beta server, I have a very similar setup, tier 50 bow and tier 50 arrows with a 30 to 31% hit accuracy. You can see that I am hitting the Abyssal Beast every single time. So rather than a chance to miss, I'm only dealing 30 or 31% of my max damage. The whole idea around this change is to avoid those misses. They really feel bad when you use a strong ability and you just splash. You don't deal any damage. Now you're always going to be dealing damage. It's just that now your accuracy will determine how much damage you can actually deal. Overall, this should be a buff to lower level players, since they will be able to damage creatures with high defense. The second major change is the critical strike system. Currently in RuneScape, the critical strike system is extremely convoluted. Not only that, a critical strike in the current game just means that you hit within the top 5% of your damage range when using an ability. With the new system, it is much easier to understand, and it also has the potential to deal more damage. Instead of the really confusing critical strike chance, it is just a base 10%. You have a 10% chance to hit a crit, and then you can increase this base critical chance by having certain items like the Reaver's Ring and whatnot. In terms of the critical strike damage, it just depends on your level. Currently at level 90 ranged, you will have the highest critical strike damage, which is 60%, meaning if you use an ability and say your max hit was 10,000 damage with that ability, well, you got a crit on top of that, so you get 60% more. Your ability would then do 16,000 damage. Overall, this new system is a small buff to critical strike damage. Another change, which is a buff to all of the original combat styles, is the increased damage cap from 10k to 30k. This mostly affects melee, since it really had a problem of hitting that 10k damage cap quite often, but it still will be an overall buff for ranged and magic as well. When testing the combat beta myself, I really found that this increased damage cap was super helpful for melee. I was able to reach a 20k hit quite often, but for ranged it was a lot more difficult. Ranged has a lot of multi-hit abilities and not high damaging abilities, so it didn't help as much. There was the odd 15k hit, but it was much harder to get. Another major change is the narrowed damage ranges on the abilities. So they did actually rework almost all of the abilities, squishing the damage range around what the ability would average for damage output. There were a lot of abilities that were changed, but just to show a few for an example, you can see the Sever ability, which is a melee ability. Before, it had an ability damage range of 37 to 188%, and average damage for that ability would be 112. But it's a pretty broad damage range, so they changed it to 110 to 130. So a lot of these abilities have increased in average ability damage. Sever is now averaging 120% damage, and the damage range is much narrower. These changes have been done for ranged abilities as well as magic abilities. Now, although it does seem like these abilities are becoming a bit stronger, it is actually compensating a change they are doing with the damage per level. I don't have too much information on this, but apparently the potion boost was boosting both accuracy and damage in two different systems. It has now been merged into one system. Now, overall, this change has decreased the damage per level you are getting for boosting your stats, but to compensate for this, they have increased the average damage output for all abilities. Tooltips for abilities have also been changed and made a bit more accurate. You can see that they're including the amount of adrenaline that the ability consumes or generates, and some more detailed information about it. The entire action bar has also been changed. You can see that they're now abbreviating the keybinds you have for your different abilities. So you can see A1, A2, well that's Alt 1, Alt 2, SQ is Shift Q, CZ is Control Z, so they have shortened all of those keybinds. They're also a lot less noticeable on the abilities, which personally I actually don't prefer. I actually like the way they had it before with the larger keybinds, because sometimes I don't know what the keybind is, and it's a bit more difficult to tell what the keybind is with these smaller fonts and just less detail on them. Another amazing change is the channel bar, which activates whenever you use a channeled ability. You'll see I use rapid fire here, and a channel bar appears below my character. The channel bar shows each tick and how long the ability is going to last. It also will show you if you cancel that channeled ability, where canceled text will pop up on the channeled bar. Personally, I think this is one of the best things that they are adding to the combat beta. It really shows a lot more visual clarity on what you're doing and will greatly help new players when learning combat. So this is definitely a thumbs up from me. Another change that is being implemented, which might be a bit difficult to see in this clip, is that now whenever you click an ability, the ability will be highlighted in yellow. The idea for this is again to add a bit more visual clarity for the player when they are in combat. You can now also use Surge, Dive, Escape, and Anticipation during the global cooldown. These abilities no longer generate adrenaline, and they're now just classified as abilities. This is actually a really interesting update. It's going to possibly add some more difficult boss encounters where you have to use these abilities within your global cooldown, and it just adds some more flexibility for the mods when they are designing some bosses. They have also mentioned that they are using Anticipation as sort of their test ability. They are potentially going to add some more abilities in this category where it will be important to use in boss encounters. So this could be a sort of a direction that RuneScape is going to end up going in for bossing. There were some other minor changes. There was a change to hit splats. There was basically an issue where too many hit splats are on screen, especially with Necromancy and the Conjures. So the hit splat fade delay is now going to be 1.2 seconds instead of the original 1.4. Also, one of the final major changes that they're making is involving the Equilibrium perk. They have changed it to be called Eruptive. The perk will now increase your ability damage by 0.5% per rank. Originally, you could get tier 4 Equilibrium perk, which means you'll get a 2% damage increase from it. So it's very similar to where it was before they squished the damage ranges and sort of ruined the Equilibrium perk. But overall, it's a good change. I do like the damage squishing on the abilities and narrowing that. So I think this change to the Eruptive perk does compensate that, and people won't really have to respec for a different perk. The Equilibrium aura has also been redesigned. It's now going to increase the player's ability damage by 12%, but it prevents the player from critically striking, so probably not something you would want to use in most encounters. Now, as for my opinion on the combat beta, I only tested ranged and melee for a few hours. I have a pretty maxed gear range setup, and shout out to RS Savage for giving me a Dracolith armor set to try out in ECB. Now, I should say that I'm not a top tier PVMer. I would consider myself fairly average at bossing. I have killed over 10,000 bosses and have killed some more difficult ones, but still, I'm definitely no top tier PVM player. So some of those players, they might have some different thoughts on the changes, especially regarding the hit caps, since in my experience, I wasn't able to really get that high above the original hit caps, especially with ranged. But as an average PVM player, I found that ranged wasn't significantly stronger than it used to, I was definitely a bit rusty when it came to my ability ranged rotation, so that is a factor to consider. But overall, I didn't find the changes too overpowered. I think there was a bit more DPS just in terms of the abilities dealing more damage. The critical strike system is just an overall buff to combat styles. So I do think that there is a buff there. But the thing with ranged is that it's a combat style with a lot of multi-hit abilities. It doesn't have that really powerful ability that can reach far above the original hit cap. In fact, I was only able to get a few crits go up to around 15k, so the hit cap increase, it may have made a small difference in DPS for me, but not a significant one. That being said, someone more familiar with the best ranged ability rotations and everything may be able to take advantage of these higher hit caps. Now, when trying out melee, this is where I saw a noticeable difference. First of all, the fact that you no longer splash was quite helpful with melee, since I found that my melee accuracy hasn't always been 100% in the live game. Melee also greatly takes advantage of the increased hit caps. It honestly was Melee's main problem in the live game. Melee's ultimate ability Berserk is much more powerful than Magic's Sunshine ability and Range's Death Swiftness, since instead of giving a 50% damage increase, Berserk gives 100%. Melee also has many one-hit high damaging abilities that would have reached the 10k hit cap easily in the live game. When testing Melee with not even the best Melee gear, I might add, I was able to consistently hit 20k crits with the Dragon Longsword special. In my opinion, these combat changes benefit Melee the most by far, and it really could make Melee fun to use again, especially with the high damaging burst abilities. I am 100% on board with these changes that are being made to combat. Some feedback that I would give is being able to toggle on and off the larger text on the action bars. Since I personally prefer the larger text, I really do like the channel ability bar and the work they're doing with making everything a bit clearer to the player. I like the idea of removing the global cooldown for certain abilities and all teleports, and combat is really starting to feel a bit smoother, and I think overall it's really allowing the combat styles to have their own niche again and just all relatively be balanced with one another. If you are interested in trying out the combat beta, I will have a link to the news post where you can try out the beta on the Jagex launcher. Just make sure that you have the launcher fully closed with your task manager before clicking the link. That was sort of a problem with me on stream. But let me know what you think of all the changes being made to combat, and if you've already tried the combat beta, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.